The air was heavy with dust and silence the day she first saw him. The wind dragged dry whispers across the prairie, carrying with it the distant cry of an eagle and the faint echo of drums from the Apache camp beyond the ridge. The land stretched wide and endless, golden under the dying sun, and every shadow seemed to move with a secret. She had grown up fearing those shadows, the stories told by travelers and soldiers about the wild tribes, their raids, and their fierce chieftains who answered to no law but their own. Yet now, standing at the edge of that very wilderness, she found herself unable to look away from the one man she was taught to fear the most. He was mounted on a chestnut horse, tall and still, as if carved from the earth itself. His dark hair caught the sunlight, and his eyes, sharp and unyielding, watched her with a depth that unsettled something inside her. She didn't know his name then. She only knew that his presence made the world around her pause. Even the wind seemed to hesitate between them. For a heartbeat, time hung suspended. Two worlds meeting under the same fading sky, neither knowing what fate had just begun. She turned away quickly, clutching the strap of her satchel as if it could steady her racing heart. She wasn't supposed to be here, not this far from the safety of the settlement. But her father's ranch had been losing cattle for weeks, and she had taken it upon herself to track the signs through the canyon. That decision, brave or foolish as it was, had led her straight into Apache territory. She told herself she wasn't afraid, but the trembling in her hands betrayed her. When she finally reached the riverbank, she knelt to refill her canteen, trying to ignore how the silence pressed against her ears. The water was clear and cold, reflecting a streak of crimson sky. Then a sound of twigs snapping somewhere behind her. She froze. Slowly she turned, and there he was again, closer this time. His horse was gone. He stood a few yards away, bow lowered but not forgotten, his gaze fixed on her as if he could read her every thought. Her breath caught. The stories had always painted his kind as ruthless. Yet his eyes didn't hold cruelty. They held caution, curiosity, and something else she couldn't name. He spoke first, his voice deep, calm, and edged with an accent that carried the rhythm of the desert itself. She couldn't understand the words, but she understood the intent. He was asking who she was, why she was here. She raised her chin, forcing courage into her voice, answering in the only way she knew. "I'm looking for cattle," she said softly. I don't mean any trouble." He studied her for a moment, then took a slow step forward. She flinched, but didn't back away. Something in his steady gaze told her that running wouldn't help. He gestured toward the canyon ridge where smoke rose in the distance, then toward her rifle slung across her shoulder. His message was clear enough. This was no place for her kind. When he finally turned and walked away, disappearing between the tall red rocks, she released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She told herself that would be the last she'd see of him. Yet that night, as she sat by her small fire, his image returned to her mind, uninvited, the strength in his stance. The quiet in his eyes, the way the world had felt still when he looked at her. She tried to shake it off. A rancher's daughter had no business thinking about an Apache chief. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of sun and wind. But something had changed. She began to find small signs near the river tracks that didn't belong to her cattle. Feathers tied to branches, stones stacked neatly on her path. Warnings, maybe, or messages. She didn't know which unnerved her more. Each time she rode out to check the fences or scout the ridges, she felt that same weight in the air, the unseen gaze watching her. And sometimes, when she turned quickly, she thought she caught a glimpse of him always at a distance, always silent. Her father noticed her distraction. The man had aged too fast in this land of drought and dust. His skin burned from years of working under the sun, his eyes sharp from loss. He had seen what raids could do. He warned her to stay near the ranch, to keep her rifle loaded and her heart cold. "Don't you ever forget, girl," he said one evening as the firelight flickered across his worn face. "They take what they want. They don't think like us." She nodded, but something inside her stirred uneasily. Maybe that was true once. Maybe it wasn't anymore. The next morning, she found one of their colts missing again.
Ow.
The tracks led through the shallow riverbed and into the canyon beyond the boundary line. Against her father's orders, she saddled her horse and followed them. The land grew rougher, wilder, every turn twisting into stone and shadow. By midday, the sun burned high above, and her canteen was half empty. She stopped to rest beneath a lone cottonwood, her horse pawing at the dust. That was when she heard the drum beats, soft, distant, rising and falling with the wind. She followed the sound, drawn like a moth to a flame. What she found beyond the ridge stole her breath. Below her lay an Apache camp, small and alive with movement. Women grinding corn, children running barefoot through the dust, men shaping arrows by the fire. It wasn't the image of savagery she had imagined. It was a village, a home, and near the center she saw him. The chief, the man from the river. He stood beside the fire, speaking to a few warriors. His expression was firm, but his posture carried the quiet authority of someone who led by more than fear. When his gaze suddenly lifted and locked onto hers across the distance, her heart stopped. He had seen her. She stumbled back, but before she could turn, 2 riders appeared behind her, their faces painted, their eyes wary. One dismounted and approached slowly, motioning for her to drop her rifle. She hesitated. Then, from below, the chief raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He walked up the slope himself, each step measured, deliberate. When he reached her, the air felt charged again, like a storm building between them. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. The marks of sun and wind on his skin spoke of endurance. The calm in his eyes spoke of wisdom and danger all at once. He said something in his language, then switched to broken English. "You should not be here." "I was looking for my horse," she said, voice shaking more than she wanted. He studied her, then glanced at the ground. "Your horse is safe." "You maybe not." There was no threat in his tone, only truth. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something entirely different, a pull she didn't understand. He reached out, taking the reins from her trembling hand to lead her down toward the camp. She resisted, pulling back, but his grip was steady. "No harm," he said quietly. "But you must see." The camp went silent as they approached. Every gaze turned to her, curious, cautious, some openly hostile. She felt their eyes like arrows, cutting through her pride. Yet the chief's calm presence beside her kept her from breaking. He led her to the fire and motioned for her to sit. When she refused, he looked at her again with that same steady gaze, and something in her resolve began to bend. It was only when he reached out, not roughly but gently, to brush the dust from her sleeve that the ground beneath her seemed to shift. His touch was brief, almost nothing at all, yet it sent a current through her so strong, it frightened her more than his people ever could. For a moment, the noise, the stares, the fear, all of it faded. The world narrowed to the space between them. She pulled away, heart racing, eyes burning with confusion and anger. But deep inside, she knew something had changed forever. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. As his hand fell back to his side, the faintest trace of understanding passed between them, an understanding neither of them had asked for. But both would be bound to face. Far across the canyon, thunder rolled through the distance, heavy and low. It sounded almost like a warning. She didn't know yet that it was the beginning of everything. The sound of thunder faded into the distance, leaving a hush over the camp. The chief's hand had fallen back to his side, but the feeling of his touch stayed with her. Lingering like a mark she couldn't wash away, she stood there frozen, caught between fear and something she didn't understand, surrounded by faces that held both suspicion and wonder. He spoke quietly to the people in his language, his tone calm, commanding, and soon the crowd began to disperse. A few of the older women stayed near the fires, watching her with narrowed eyes, whispering words she couldn't decipher. She felt small among them, a stranger wrapped in dust and uncertainty. The chief motioned for her to follow him to a small tent set apart from the rest. It was made of animal hides, its entrance marked with painted symbols. She hesitated at first, her pride fighting against her fear. But curiosity, that stubborn part of her that had driven her across the boundary in the first place, urged her forward. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and herbs. There were woven blankets, carved wooden bowls, and a few feathers tied with leather cords hanging from the poles. He gestured for her to sit on a folded mat near the fire pit. He crouched across from her, his eyes steady as ever. For a while neither spoke. The only sound came from the soft crackle of the fire. Finally, he broke the silence. "You came far," he said in his rough English. "Why?" She met his gaze, trying to find her voice. "My father's land lies south of here." Our horses keep disappearing. I came to find them. His eyes flickered, not with guilt but with understanding. Horses run, he said slowly. Sometimes they follow the wind, sometimes men take them. Are your men the ones taking them? She asked before she could stop herself. The words came out sharper than she intended. He didn't answer right away. He studied her face as if measuring how much truth she could bear. Then he said, "You think my people are thieves?" Her heart thudded. I don't know what to think. But every time I follow the tracks, they lead here. He nodded once, as if her words didn't surprise him. This land was ours before your people came, he said quietly. The cattle, the horses, the rivers, they remember us. We take back. Maybe it is not stealing, only remembering. His words settled heavy in the air. She didn't know how to answer. Everything she'd been taught about right and wrong seemed to blur in that small space between them. For the first time, she saw not a wild enemy, but a man defending a world she had never tried to understand. He rose and moved toward the entrance. "You will stay until the sun returns," he said. "Too many eyes watch the ridge tonight." "I can find my way home," she argued, standing quickly. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "If you walk now, you will not find home. You will find men who wait with rifles. They think you are a spy." Her breath caught. "A spy? They see you come alone into our land. They think you carry messages." His gaze softened slightly. "You are safer here until the morning." He left her there with a folded blanket and a bowl of something warm corn mixed with herbs she couldn't name. She ate in silence, her mind churning. She thought about her father, probably pacing by now, angered and worried in equal measure. She thought about the people outside, living in a world she had never imagined. But most of all, she thought about the man who had looked at her not as an enemy, but as a question he couldn't yet answer. That night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of the camp. Somewhere, a drum beat rose faintly, slow and haunting. A coyote howled in the distance. Children laughed near a fire before their mothers called them inside. It was a rhythm of life so different from the one she knew, yet strangely human, familiar in its simplicity. Still, beneath that calm surface, she felt tension, a quiet unease that ran like an undercurrent through the camp. Something was brewing, something the chief wasn't saying. When dawn broke, the sky was washed in pale gold. She stepped out into the cool morning air. The camp was already alive with motion. Men saddled horses, women prepared food, and the chief stood near the ridge, speaking to a few riders. When he saw her, he nodded, toward the horses. "You will go home now," he said. "One of my men will take you near the river. When there, you know your way." She nodded, though part of her wanted to ask more to understand what he meant by remembering, by reclaiming. Instead, she thanked him, her voice quiet. As she mounted her horse, she noticed something strange. The chief wore around his neck a small leather pouch decorated with turquoise beads. It glinted faintly in the morning light. She had seen something just like it once before, hanging from a nail in her father's barn, taken years ago after a skirmish near the ridge. Her heart stirred with unease. The ride back was long and silent. The Apache rider who escorted her spoke little, only nodding once when they reached the edge of the river. She crossed alone, turning once to look back. The camp was hidden by the rocks now, only a faint trail of smoke marking where it had been. But she could feel his presence still, like a shadow behind her thoughts. When she reached the ranch, her father was waiting by the gate, rifle in hand, his face dark with anger and relief. "Where in God's name have you been?" he demanded. She slid off her horse, trying to steady her voice. "I found them," she said. "The Apache camp. They didn't hurt me." He stared at her, disbelief etched across his features. "You went into their camp and lived to tell it? Do you have any idea what that means?" "I know what I saw," she said firmly. "They aren't monsters, Father. They're just people trying to survive. You were wrong about them." His eyes narrowed. "You think you understand them after one night?" He slammed the rifle butt against the ground. "Those people killed your uncle, burned half the stock last spring, and you sit here talking about understanding?" The argument burned between them until her voice cracked. Maybe if someone tried to listen for once, there wouldn't be killing at all. He didn't answer. He only turned away, muttering under his breath, leaving her alone in the yard. She stood there a long time, watching the horizon, feeling the wind tug at her hair. Somewhere beyond those hills, the Apache chief was probably looking at that same sky, maybe wondering if she had made it home. Days passed, but peace didn't follow. No? Rumors spread through the nearby settlements that a new attack was coming. Soldiers had been seen near the border, their horses restless, their tempers high. Her father joined meetings with the ranchers, all of them armed and ready. She tried to warn him that fighting would only bring more bloodshed, but he wouldn't listen. "You can't reason with people who speak through arrows," he said. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, she saw something moving near the far fence line, a lone figure on horseback, watching from a distance. Her breath caught. Even from far away, she knew it was him, the Apache chief. He didn't move closer, didn't call out. He just sat there, the wind tugging at his hair, the same calm strength in his posture. Then, with one final glance, he turned his horse and disappeared into the canyon. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the windmill, every whisper of the trees, seemed to carry his presence. What did he come for? A warning? A farewell? Or something else entirely? When dawn came, the ranch was uneasy. Her father rode out early with 2 men, following rumors of Apache scouts near the ridge. Hours passed with no word. Then, near sunset, she saw smoke rising in the distance, thin at first, then darker, spreading fast. Her heart sank. She saddled her horse and rode hard toward the ridge, ignoring the shouts behind her. When she reached the clearing, she saw chaos. The ground was scarred with hoofprints, a wagon overturned, smoke still curling from the ashes of a campfire. There were no bodies, only silence and the faint echo of something that had just ended. She dismounted slowly, the smell of burned wood heavy in the air. Then she saw it, half buried in the dust near the rocks, a small turquoise bead, glinting in the dying light. She knelt and picked it up, her hand trembling. It was from his pouch, the one he always wore. The world seemed to tilt as realization struck. Whatever had happened here wasn't just another raid or patrol gone wrong. It was something deeper, something tied to the uneasy bond that had formed between them. She didn't know if he was alive, or if her father had met him in battle. But she knew this land was no longer divided by just fences and borders. It was divided by hearts, hers most of all. As the wind swept through the valley, carrying with it the ashes and the echoes of thunder, she turned toward the horizon, her pulse unsteady. Somewhere out there, the story between them was far from over. The turquoise bead felt heavy in her palm, far heavier than it should have. She turned it over slowly, its edges smoothed by time, its color still bright against the dirt. Flickered the faint glint of that same bead hanging from his chest as he stood before the fire. Now it lay here in the ashes of what had once been peace. Her throat tightened as she looked across the burned clearing. The earth smelled of smoke and iron. It wasn't just a raid or a patrol gone wrong. It felt like a warning, or maybe the beginning of something much worse. She slipped the bead into her pocket and scanned the horizon. The wind carried faint sounds, a horse snorting somewhere in the canyon, the creak of leather, the hush of movement. She crouched low behind a boulder, heart hammering. From between the rocks, 2 riders appeared, moving cautiously toward the burnt camp. Soldiers, their uniforms were dusty and torn, rifles slung across their backs. When they dismounted, she recognized one of them, Lieutenant Carver, a man her father had dealt with before. Carver's face was lined from years of harsh sunlight, his jaw sharp, his eyes as cold as the metal he carried. He knelt near the ashes, running his fingers through the charred remains. They were here, he muttered to the other soldier. The chief's band, but someone warned them. They cleared out to clean. The younger soldier looked uneasy. "Sir, what if the girl's father finds out? He might not." Carver cut him off sharply. "We'll find out when I tell him. We've got orders from the fort. The Apaches have been gathering along the ridge. If we don't move fast, we'll lose the whole valley." Her pulse quickened, so it wasn't just tension, it was war brewing under everyone's nose. She stepped back quietly, ready to slip away before they spotted her. But the toe of her boot hit a loose stone. It rolled down the slope, clattering against another. Carver's head snapped up. "Who's there?" he barked. He grabbed his rifle, eyes scanning the rocks. She ran. The sound of her boots against gravel broke the stillness. Behind her came shouts, the thud of footsteps. She ducked between the boulders, heart pounding, and leapt across a dry creek bed. A shot cracked through the air, hitting the ground inches from her feet. She didn't look back. She kept running until the sound of pursuit faded into the wind. When she finally reached the ranch again, dusk was falling. Her lungs burned and her clothes were streaked with dust. Her father was nowhere in sight. Only the old ranch hand, Elias, stood by the corral, repairing a fence rail. He looked up when he saw her, his weathered face tight with concern. "You've been gone near half the day," he said. "Your pa's out with the others." "Trouble's brewing up north, I know," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I found what's left of a camp. The soldiers were there too. They're planning something." Elias sighed, setting down his hammer. "The army's been restless ever since that cattle dispute. Your father's been talking with them more than usual. He thinks there'll be a fight before the week's out." She looked toward the horizon where the mountains cut sharp against the sky. "There doesn't have to be," she said softly. "He's wrong about them, Elias. The Apache chief, he's not what people say." The old man's brow furrowed. "You met him again?" She hesitated, then nodded. "He saved me. He could have left me out there, but he didn't. They aren't the savages the stories make them out to be." Elias studied her quietly. "Maybe not. But you can't change a man's mind when his heart's full of old wounds. Your PA lost his brother in the raids. You won't ever forget that." She looked down, her hands gripping the fence rail. "Then maybe I have to make him see before more blood is spilled." That night, the air grew restless. The moon hung low and red, and coyotes cried in the distance. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the turquoise bead, saw the firelight reflecting in the chief's eyes, heard his voice telling her to see. The words haunted her like a riddle she couldn't solve. Finally, she rose, wrapped her shawl tight, and stepped outside. The land lay still, vast and breathing beneath the stars. She walked toward the river, drawn by instinct more than reason. When she reached the water's edge, the reflection of the moon shimmered on the surface, and she heard a horse's soft tread behind her. She turned sharply, hand on her knife. But it wasn't a soldier. He was there just beyond the trees. The Apache chief. His horse moved silently over the sand, stopping a few feet away. He dismounted and stood in the moonlight, his face shadowed but unmistakable. For a long moment neither spoke. The night was full of unspoken questions. "You came," she whispered, disbelief mingling with relief. He nodded. "You were seen at the fire. The soldiers follow your tracks. You are in danger." "I know," she said. "They're planning to strike the ridge before dawn." He stepped closer, his gaze searching hers. "Then we both stand between two storms." His words hung in the air, simple but heavy with truth. She swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "Hey." The silence stretched between them until she finally asked, "Why did you leave your bead there?" He reached up, touching the empty place where the pouch had been. "It was taken. A sign left behind by your soldiers. They want us to answer with war." Her breath caught. "Then they're trying to start it." "Yes," he said quietly. "They think blood will bring peace. But blood only brings ghosts." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. There was no anger there, only a kind of tired sorrow. She wanted to believe that peace was still possible, that somehow she could stop what was coming. "If I could speak to my father, if I could make him listen." He shook his head. "He will not hear you. His eyes see only what has been lost." She looked toward the distant lights of the ranch, her heart torn between duty and something deeper. "Then what do we do?" He studied her for a long moment, then said, "There is a meeting at sunrise. My people will decide if they stay or if they fight. I want you to come." She stared at him, stunned. "If they see me, they'll think I'm one of the soldiers." "I will make them see truth," he said simply. "You must tell them what you know. Show them there is still time." Her pulse raced. It was dangerous, reckless even. But something inside her told her she couldn't turn away now. "I'll come," she said softly. He nodded once, then mounted his horse again. "When the first light touches the mountain, follow the river." "I will wait." Then he was gone, swallowed by the night, leaving only the soft echo of hooves fading into the distance. She stood there a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been. The night wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of rain. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for dawn. By the time she returned to the house, the first hint of light had begun to touch the sky. Her father's voice broke the silence. "Where were you?" He stood by the doorway, eyes hard and weary. She froze. "I needed to think," she said quickly. "You think too much about things that'll get you killed," he snapped. "The army rides at first light. We're ending this before they strike again." Her stomach turned cold. "You can't do that," she said. "They're not planning to attack. The soldiers are pushing this fight." His eyes flared. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're blinded by pity." "I'm not," she said fiercely. "I've seen their camp. I've spoken to their chief. He doesn't want war." Her father stepped closer, voice low with warning. "You say one more word in their defense and you'll regret it. I won't lose another family member to them." She opened her mouth, but no words came. He turned away, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the house like a closing fate. As the sun rose higher, she saddled her horse in secret. The path to the river shimmered with morning mist, the air thick with tension. Every hoofbeat felt like a drum against her chest. When she reached the canyon, she saw him waiting, just as he'd promised. His people gathered in a circle near the fire, faces painted for war, their voices low and urgent. When they saw her, murmurs rippled through the crowd. The chief raised his hand for silence. "She comes with truth," he said. "Let her speak." All eyes turned to her. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke. She told them about the soldiers' plan, about the lies meant to draw them into a trap. Some faces softened, others hardened with distrust. A man stepped forward, tall and fierce, his voice rising with anger. "Why should we believe her? Her blood is theirs." The chief's gaze stayed on her, unwavering. "'Cause I do," he said simply. The murmurs quieted, but the air still pulsed with tension. She could feel the fragile line between peace and war stretching thinner by the second. And deep down, she knew that no matter what was decided here, the world she had known was already changing. As the wind swept across the ridge, stirring the dust around them, she looked at the chief and realized that whatever was coming next would test every truth she had ever believed. The mountains loomed behind them, silent witnesses to a storm that had only just begun. The crowd around the fire was silent, each face lit by the flickering orange light. The chief stood beside her, his expression carved in calm, but she could feel the storm brewing under the surface. The Apache warriors watched her every move, their suspicions sharp and cold. Some held their weapons tightly, others crossed their arms, their eyes shadowed with doubt. She could hear the wind pressing through the canyon, carrying the scent of dust and rain, whispering warnings that no one wanted to hear. When she finished speaking, no one moved. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a hawk. Then an older warrior stepped forward. His face was painted with streaks of black and red, his eyes dark with grief. "You say the soldiers will strike," he said. "They have struck before. What makes this time different?" She swallowed hard, her voice trembling but steady. "This time they won't stop. They've been told you were gathering to attack. They think this will end it. But if you fight back, they'll burn every camp from here to the border." The man's jaw tightened. "So we sit and wait to die?" Before she could answer, the chief spoke, his tone calm but commanding. "We will not die waiting. But we must know where truth lies before we move." His gaze turned to her. "You say your father rides with the soldiers?" She nodded slowly. "He does. He believes the army can protect the ranchers. Doesn't know they plan to use this fight as an excuse to take more land." The chief's eyes darkened. "Then he stands with those who would destroy what they do not understand." She looked down, shame tightening in her chest. "He's blinded by the past. He lost his brother to one of your raids years ago. He doesn't see that this isn't the same fight anymore." The chief said nothing for a long moment, then turned to his people. "If war comes, we will meet it, but not tonight. We will watch, we will move, and when the sun sets again, we will decide." The circle broke apart, murmurs spreading through the camp. Some nodded in agreement, others shook their heads in frustration. The tension was thick enough to taste. The chief turned to her and motioned toward a small rise overlooking the canyon. "Come," he said. "You must see something." They climbed the slope in silence. From the top, the view stretched wide across the valley, the same land she had grown up riding through, now caught between two worlds on the edge of destruction. Smoke rose in the distance, faint but unmistakable. She knew that signal. It was from the soldiers. They were already on the move. "They'll reach this ridge by dawn," she said quietly. He nodded, "and we have few hours left." His voice was low, thoughtful. "Do you still believe peace can be saved?" She hesitated. "I have to believe it. Otherwise, everything my father taught me. Everything your people fight for, it all means nothing." He studied her face, the faintest flicker of something unreadable crossing his expression. "Belief is easy when the heart is far from the fire," he said softly. "But you are standing in it now." A sound broke the silence, a distant rumble of hooves echoing against the canyon walls. Both turned sharply. The chief motioned for her to stay low as he crouched near the rocks, scanning the ridge below. In the fading light, shadows moved along the river trail. A line of riders, soldiers. Her heart lurched. "They're early," she whispered. He looked at her, calm but tense. "How many?" "More than a dozen," she said. "And my father rides with them." The chief's expression didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten. "Then it begins sooner than we thought." She wanted to warn the others, to shout that there was still time to stop it, but before she could move, the first rifle shot cracked through the air. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, followed by another and another. Horses screamed in panic. The camp below erupted into motion, women gathering children, warriors grabbing their weapons. Smoke began to rise as bullets tore through the tents. She turned toward the chief. "You have to stop this." His voice was steady but fierce. "I did not start it." He whistled sharply, and within seconds, riders appeared, moving with precision and speed. They didn't attack, not yet. They circled the camp, guarding the women and elders as they fled toward the rocks. She followed the chief down the slope, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. When they reached the camp, chaos had already taken root. The air was thick with dust and fear. A horse galloped past, its rider shouting orders in Apache. The chief moved through the storm with unshaken control, calling to his people in their language. His presence enough to steady those around him. She grabbed his arm. "There's still time. If my father sees you're not fighting, he might." Before she could finish, a voice shouted from the ridge above. "Hold your fire." She turned. Her father sat on horseback at the front of the soldiers, rifle raised but not aimed. His face was hard, his voice loud enough to carry across the canyon. "Let the woman go. She's one of ours." The chief's eyes flicked to her, unreadable. He said nothing, only watched as the soldiers began to spread out along the ridge. Taking positions, her father's voice thundered again. "Send her back, and we'll talk." The chief didn't move. His calm was unnerving. "Talk," he called back, his voice deep and measured. "You come with fire and lead, and you speak of talk." A murmur rippled through the soldiers. Her father's jaw tightened. "You stole our horses. You burned our fences. What kind of talk do you expect after that?" The chief's gaze didn't waver. "You took our land. You burned our homes. We remember too. The standoff was unbearable." The air itself seemed to hold its breath. She stepped forward, her voice breaking through the silence. "Stop it, both of you." Her father turned his horse sharply toward her. "Get away from them. You don't know what you're doing?" "I know exactly what I'm doing," she shouted back. "They're not your enemy." He raised his hand, signaling the men to hold, but the tension was too fragile. One nervous soldier fired a shot. It hit the ground near the fire, scattering sparks into the air. That one mistake shattered everything. The next second exploded into chaos. The soldiers opened fire. Arrows whistled in reply. Horses reared, men shouted, and smoke filled the air. She dropped to the ground, covering her head as dirt and dust flew around her. The chief pulled her behind a fallen log, shielding her as bullets splintered the wood above them. Her ears rang with the sound of gunfire. She tried to call out to her father, but her voice was swallowed by the storm of noise. The chief's hand was firm on her shoulder, keeping her low. "You cannot go out there," he said. "I have to stop them," she cried. He shook his head. "Not now. Not while they see only enemies." Around them, the camp burned. The smell of smoke and gunpowder choked the air. She could see shapes moving through the haze, soldiers advancing, Apache warriors retreating toward the rocks. But the chief didn't move. His eyes followed every motion, his mind working faster than his words. Then she saw him, her father, riding down the slope through the smoke, shouting orders, his rifle raised. She wanted to run to him, to make him see reason, but before she could move, the chief stood. He stepped into the open, no weapon drawn, his voice cutting through the noise. "Stop," he shouted, his tone carrying the weight of command. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Even the soldiers hesitated. He looked straight at her father. Enough blood has been spilled on this land. Her father's eyes widened as he realized who stood before him. The air thickened with recognition and fury. "You," he said through gritted teeth. "You're the one they call Hawkeyes." The chief nodded once. "And you are the man who burned our winter stores." Her father raised his rifle, hand shaking. "You killed my brother." The chief didn't flinch. "And your brother killed my son." The words hung in the smoke like a blade. For a heartbeat, everything was still. No one moved, no one breathed. The truth between them was too raw to deny. Her father's hand trembled on the trigger. She knew that look, the same one he had carried since her childhood, the look of a man haunted by ghosts he couldn't bury. She took a step forward, desperate, tears cutting through the dust on her face. "Father, please," she whispered. "Don't do this." But he didn't hear her. The chief stood tall, unarmed, eyes steady, as if daring fate itself to choose. The soldiers shifted uneasily. The Apache warriors watched from the shadows, waiting. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the wind. It was as if the whole world held its breath, balanced on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. Then from somewhere behind the soldiers, a new sound broke through, the sharp call of a bugle from the hills, followed by the thunder of hooves. Reinforcements. The chief's eyes flicked toward the sound, and she saw the realization in them. The soldiers weren't done. The worst hadn't even begun. Her father turned, confusion flashing across his face. The wind rose, carrying the smell of rain and smoke. And in that moment, she understood that everything they loved, everything they fought for, was about to collide. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft and cold, hissing as they met the burning ground. The chief looked at her, his voice barely a whisper over the storm. "When the thunder comes, choose wisely," he said. Then the valley erupted into war. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, washing the dust and smoke from the air. The thunder rolled over the canyon, echoing like the sound of ancient drums. The valley that had moments ago been consumed by chaos now lay under a gray, trembling sky. The fighting slowed as the rain thickened, drowning the gunfire and scattering the sound into the distance. She crouched behind a fallen log, her heart pounding, her mind spinning with the weight of everything that had happened. The chief was somewhere ahead, and her father was still among the soldiers. The storm had forced both sides into uneasy stillness. Horses stumbled in the mud, their riders shouting to be heard over the rain. The Apache warriors had pulled back toward the rocks. The soldiers regrouped along the ridge, their movements weary and uncertain. For the first time, the lines between them seemed blurred, both sides soaked, tired, and covered in the same red earth. She rose from her shelter and stepped into the open, her clothes clinging to her, her hair plastered against her face. Her voice broke the air. "Stop this," she shouted. "No more fighting." The sound was swallowed by the storm, but her father turned at the noise. His eyes widened when he saw her walking through the rain, her hands raised. The chief, standing only a few yards away, watched too, his expression unreadable but calm. The two men who had carried years of grief and anger, between them now stood with the same realization: they could keep fighting and lose everything, or they could end it here. She walked to the space between them, her boots sinking into the wet ground. "Look around you," she cried. "There's nothing left to win. The land is drowning, the people are broken, and you're both standing in the ruins of what you loved." Her father's rifle wavered. The chief's warriors watched from the rocks, uncertain whether to lower their weapons. Lightning cracked in the distance, illuminating the valley for a brief, silent heartbeat. The chief finally spoke, his deep voice steady over the wind. "She is right. The earth has spoken louder than we have. We have taken too much from her already." Her father looked at him, water dripping from the brim of his hat, his chest heaving. For years, hatred had been his armor. But in that moment, standing in the storm, he saw the truth in the chief's words. He slowly lowered his rifle, his shoulders sagging as if carrying the weight of his brother's ghost. "I never wanted it to end like this," he said quietly. The chief nodded once. "Neither did I." Strange peace settled between them, fragile but real. The soldiers behind her father hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Then one of them, a younger man, stepped forward and shouted, "They're retreating!" The word spread like a wave. The Apache warriors began to back away, not in defeat but in choice. The chief raised his hand to his people, signaling for them to stop fighting. The soldiers, seeing the gesture, slowly lowered their weapons too. The rain softened, as if the sky itself had decided to let the land breathe again. She stood between them, shivering, but for the first time since the battle began, she felt warmth inside her chest. Her father walked toward her, his face tired, his eyes soft with something she hadn't seen in years, regret. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "All this time I thought fighting was the only way." She shook her head, her voice quiet. "You can't protect anyone by destroying everything around you." He nodded slowly, looking toward the chief. "Maybe I was wrong about them." The chief stepped closer, his gaze firm, but without anger. "We have both been wrong," he said, "but maybe it is not too late to start again." That night the rain continued to fall, washing away the ashes of the battle. The soldiers gathered under what remained of their tents, and the Apache warriors made camp farther down the canyon. For the first time in months, there was no shouting, no smoke, no gunfire, only the steady rhythm of the storm. She stayed awake beside the small fire her father built, watching the flames dance. He sat across from her, silent for a long time, until he finally said, "I'll talk to them in the morning. Maybe there's a way to make peace official." She smiled faintly. "The chief will listen." "He's not what you thought he was," her father sighed, rubbing his hands together near the fire. "Neither am I, maybe." When dawn came, the clouds began to break, and the light returned to the canyon. The earth smelled clean again, alive in a way it hadn't for a long time. The chief approached their camp, walking alone, without guards or weapons. Her father met him halfway. She watched from a short distance as they spoke quietly, their words lost to the wind, but their faces told enough. There was still grief there, still pain, but also understanding. Later, when the soldiers packed their things and began the slow ride back to town, her father stayed behind. He stood beside her, watching the Apache families gather their horses and children. The chief gave her a small nod before turning away to lead his people deeper into the valley. It wasn't a farewell of strangers, it was a recognition that something had changed. Days turned into weeks. The government, once determined to drive the Apache out, hesitated after hearing reports that both sides wanted peace. The fighting stopped, though the scars it left remained visible on the land and in their hearts. Her father reopened the ranch, but hired many of the displaced families to work with him, not for him. The chief's people traded freely again, and soon the valley began to heal. Grass returned where fires had burned, and the river ran clear. The sounds of hammers and laughter replaced the echoes of gunfire. Sometimes she would ride to the edge of the canyon and watch the sunrise over the same ridge where the worst of it had happened. Each morning felt like a reminder that peace, once shattered, could still be rebuilt piece by piece. One evening, as she was returning home, she saw her father sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon. His hat rested in his lap, his hair streaked with gray. She joined him, and for a long time they said nothing. Then he spoke softly. "I used to think this land belonged to us," he said, "but I see now it never did." "We belong to it," she smiled, resting her hand on his arm. "That's what they've been trying to tell us all along." He nodded slowly. "Took me too long to listen. Sky turned gold as the sun dipped behind the hills. The air was still warm, filled with the quiet hum of life returning. For the first time, there was no line dividing the valley. It was simply land shared, breathing, alive. Years later, and the stories of the battle became something told around campfires instead of shouted across battlefields. People would still remember that night. Some said the rain had saved them all. Others said it was the voice of the earth demanding peace. But she knew it wasn't the storm that changed everything. It was the moment two men chose to stop listening to hate. She carried that memory with her always, as a reminder that peace wasn't born from strength, but from surrender, the courage to lay down a weapon and open a hand instead. When the chief passed years later, his people honored him with songs that rose through the canyon. Her father attended quietly, standing beside her. Neither spoke, but both knew what the other was thinking, that without the chief's strength, they might never have found their own way to forgiveness. Afterward, she walked alone to the edge of the valley. The air was warm, the grass swaying gently under the soft wind. She could almost hear the voices of the past carried through the hills, the cries, the promises, the prayers, and somewhere among them the quiet, steady voice of the chief saying, "When the thunder comes, choose wisely." She smiled through her tears, whispering to the wind, "I did." And as the sun broke through the clouds, casting light over the valley, she felt at peace. The land had finally found its stillness again. The battle was long over, but its lessons remained not in blood, but in the hearts of those who had learned that forgiveness could be stronger than fear. The valley would live on, green and whole, and so would the memory of those who had stood in the rain and chosen not to fight. It was not a victory carved in glory or songs, but it was the kind of peace that endures, the kind born from pain, carried by love and kept alive by those brave enough to believe in it.